People think storms begin in the sky. Mine began beneath a chandelier. The weather forecast had warned about heavy rain rolling across Manhattan after sunset, but nobody cancels a charity gala because of bad weather. Wealthy donors still arrived in black SUVs polished until they reflected the city lights like mirrors. Women stepped onto the red carpet wearing gowns worth more than my yearly rent, while men adjusted tuxedos that probably cost more than my 12-year-old Honda Civic. I wasn't there to drink champagne or smile for photographers. I was there because flowers don't arrange themselves, and the luxury event company I worked for promised double pay if someone agreed to handle a last-minute emergency delivery. Student loans have a way of making every bad idea sound reasonable. By 7:30, rain was already drumming against the glass walls of the Grand Crescent Hotel so hard it almost drowned out the string quartet warming up inside the ballroom. I tightened my grip on the rolling cart loaded with white orchids, pale roses, and cascading ivy while my sneakers squeaked against the marble floor. My black delivery jacket was soaked through despite the short walk from the loading dock, and damp strands of blonde hair clung stubbornly to my cheeks. Elegant guests barely noticed me as they floated past carrying crystal glasses and conversations about investment portfolios, political fundraisers, and vacation homes somewhere warm enough to forget winter existed. Invisible. That was the best word for people like me. We built beautiful nights for strangers and disappeared before anyone remembered our names. My name is Claire Bennett. 26 years old. Born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. Florist by profession. Dreamer by necessity. I believed flowers could make people kinder, even if only for a few hours. Looking back now, I realize kindness had nothing to do with what happened that night. I checked the placement list clipped to my clipboard. Ballroom entrance. Main stage. Donor tables. Grand staircase. Everything had to be perfect before 8 o'clock. The event coordinator hurried toward me with the frantic expression I'd seen 100 times before. Claire, the centerpieces near the terrace need replacing. The wind damaged them when the doors opened. I nodded without complaining. Florists don't argue with weather. We simply adapt. As I pushed my cart toward the terrace, lightning flashed beyond the towering windows, turning the skyline into a white silhouette for a heartbeat before darkness reclaimed it. A low rumble followed several seconds later, deep enough to vibrate through the marble beneath my feet. Guests laughed a little louder, pretending not to notice nature interrupting their carefully planned evening. Another gust rattled the glass doors. The lights flickered once. Then steadied. Something about that tiny hesitation made everyone glance upward before returning to their conversations as if nothing had happened. I should have done the same. Instead, I looked outside. Rain streamed sideways across the city, blurring skyscrapers into ghosts. For reasons I still can't explain, a chill crawled down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. It felt like the storm wasn't trying to get inside the hotel. It felt like it was waiting for someone to arrive. I carried the replacement arrangement toward the terrace with both hands wrapped around the heavy crystal vase, careful not to let the orchids sway as another burst of thunder rolled above the city. The ballroom shimmered with golden light reflected from towering chandeliers, yet the sound of rain pressing against the glass never disappeared. It lingered beneath every conversation like a warning no one wanted to hear. The terrace doors opened as a waiter stepped inside with an empty tray, and a blast of cool wind rushed through the ballroom. Candle flames trembled. White linen napkins fluttered across nearby tables. One of my roses slipped loose and landed on the polished floor. I bent to retrieve it just as the lights flickered again. This time they stayed dim for several long seconds before emergency lighting quietly illuminated the walls in a soft amber glow. Guests laughed nervously, assuming it was nothing more than weather interfering with the electrical system. Someone even joked that dramatic lighting would encourage larger donations. The musicians stopped playing, then awkwardly resumed when the chandeliers brightened again. I finished adjusting the flowers beside the terrace entrance and glanced toward the service hallway, wondering if maintenance had everything under control. The event coordinator waved frantically from across the room, signaling me toward another display near the private reception lounge reserved for major sponsors. I pushed my empty cart through a quieter corridor where the sounds of the ballroom faded behind thick walnut doors. The hallway smelled different from the ballroom. Less like perfume and champagne. More like polished wood, expensive leather, and fresh rain drifting through hidden ventilation. Halfway down the corridor I heard voices. Calm. Controlled. Not loud enough to sound angry, but serious enough to make me instinctively slow my steps. I had no intention of listening. Wealthy people discussed business every day. None of it concerned a florist trying to finish her shift. I lowered my eyes and kept walking until another flash of lightning briefly darkened the hallway. The ceiling lights blinked once. Twice. Then everything went completely black. Someone nearby muttered under his breath. Another voice answered with surprising composure. A second later backup lighting glowed along the floor, casting long shadows across the hallway. My heart sped up as I reached for the wall to steady myself. That was when I realized I had stopped directly outside the partially open door to the private lounge. Through the narrow opening I could see only silhouettes against rain-streaked windows. One man stood perfectly still while another placed something small on the table between them. It looked like an ordinary silver flash drive. No raised voices. No panic. Just a brief exchange followed by one sentence spoken so quietly I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Everything changes tonight. Silence answered. Then footsteps moved toward the door. My stomach tightened. I immediately looked away and continued pushing my cart as naturally as I could, pretending to study the clipboard in my hand. The door opened behind me, but I resisted every temptation to turn around. Invisible people survive by remaining invisible. I reminded myself of that with every step. Yet before I reached the corner, every light inside the hotel suddenly went dark again, and this blackout lasted much longer than the first. Darkness changes the way people reveal themselves. The first sound I noticed was not fear. It was silence. A ballroom filled with nearly 400 guests had gone completely quiet, as though everyone had inhaled at exactly the same moment and forgotten how to breathe. The emergency lights failed to come on immediately, leaving only distant flashes of lightning spilling through the towering windows every few seconds. Each white burst painted the hallway in frozen snapshots before everything disappeared again. I kept one hand on the handle of my empty cart and the other against the wall, trying to remember where the nearest service exit was. Somewhere behind me, a woman laughed nervously before apologizing for laughing at all. Somewhere farther away, a glass shattered against marble, followed by someone assuring everyone it was only an accident. Then I heard footsteps. Calm. Even. Unhurried. They echoed through the corridor with a confidence that made every other sound seem uncertain. Whoever was walking was not searching for light. He already knew exactly where he was going. Another flash of lightning illuminated the hallway, and for the briefest heartbeat I saw him. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. Dark hair brushed neatly away from a composed face. He was surrounded by several men wearing matching dark suits, yet none of them walked beside him. They remained half a step behind without being told. It was the kind of invisible choreography that only happens when respect becomes instinct. The lights returned before I could study him longer. Crystal chandeliers slowly awakened overhead, filling the corridor with warm gold again. Conversations resumed all at once, louder than before, everyone pretending the interruption had never happened. But the hallway had changed. Hotel employees who moments earlier hurried past with trays and clipboards now stepped aside without speaking. Security personnel straightened their jackets. Even the event coordinator who had been shouting instructions all evening suddenly lowered her voice. No announcement introduced the man. Nobody needed one. I watched from the edge of the corridor as he approached the private lounge. His expression remained unreadable, almost peaceful, but his pale blue eyes seemed to notice everything without lingering on anything. He acknowledged no one with dramatic gestures. A simple nod here. A brief glance there. Somehow that quiet presence carried more authority than any speech could have. As he reached the lounge entrance, one of the suited men leaned toward him and whispered something too softly for me to hear. The man's eyes shifted for the first time, landing directly on the partially open table inside the room. The silver flash drive I had noticed earlier was gone. I felt my stomach tighten. Had someone already collected it? Had I imagined seeing it in the first place? Before I could answer my own questions, another employee rushed past me carrying fresh candles. Her shoulder brushed my cart, causing one of the empty floral crates balanced on top to slide toward the floor. I reacted without thinking and caught it just before it landed. Something small slipped from beneath the crate and skidded silently across the polished marble until it stopped inches from my shoe. I looked down. A silver flash drive reflected the chandelier light like a tiny piece of captured lightning. My heartbeat stumbled. It looked exactly like the one I had seen only moments before. Nobody else seemed to notice it. When I slowly lifted my eyes again, the man at the lounge entrance was already looking straight at me. I should have walked away. That is the sentence I repeated to myself 1,000 times afterward. If I had simply left the flash drive where it rested on the marble floor, my life probably would have continued exactly as it had before. I would have delivered flowers, worried about rent, and spent Sunday afternoons calling my mother in Ohio. Instead, instinct took over before reason had a chance. I bent down, picked up the tiny silver drive, and looked around for someone who might have dropped it. Guests drifted through the hallway again, smiling politely as though the blackout had never interrupted the evening. Waiters hurried past carrying fresh champagne. Hotel staff whispered into radios. Nobody searched the floor. Nobody appeared concerned that anything was missing. I slipped the flash drive into the front pocket of my delivery jacket, planning to hand it to hotel security before I left. It felt like the responsible thing to do. Nothing more. I took one step toward the service hallway when a calm voice stopped me without ever raising its volume. Mississippi. I froze. Slowly I turned around. The man from the corridor stood only a few feet away. Up close he looked younger than I had expected, perhaps 33, but there was something timeless about the composure in his face. His tuxedo fit perfectly without appearing flashy. A silver watch rested beneath the cuff of his sleeve. His pale blue eyes remained steady, neither cold nor warm, simply observant in a way that made me feel as though he noticed details other people overlooked. The men accompanying him remained several feet behind, giving him space without needing instructions. "Did something fall near your cart?" he asked. His voice was low and controlled, carrying the faint rhythm of someone whose family had come from Italy generations earlier. There was no accusation in the question, only quiet certainty. I hesitated for half a second. Long enough to wonder why he already seemed to know the answer. "I found a flash drive," I admitted. "I thought it belonged to one of the guests. I was going to turn it into security." His expression did not change, but I noticed one small detail. The muscles along his jaw relaxed ever so slightly, as though my answer confirmed something important. Before he could respond, another man in an expensive charcoal suit appeared from the opposite end of the hallway. He smiled too quickly. "Excuse me," he said pleasantly. "Hotel security is collecting misplaced property. If you found anything during the outage, I can take it from here." His words sounded perfectly normal. His eyes did not. They flickered toward my jacket pocket for less than a second before returning to my face. Somehow that tiny movement unsettled me more than anything else that had happened all evening. I instinctively stepped back. The man in front of me noticed it too. He shifted almost imperceptibly, placing himself between me and the smiling stranger without making the gesture feel dramatic. "Thank you," he said evenly. "My team will handle it." The stranger's smile remained in place, but it no longer reached his eyes. "Of course," he replied after a brief pause. "Enjoy your evening." He walked away at an unhurried pace, disappearing into the growing crowd. I watched until he vanished around the corner. When I turned back, the man in the tuxedo was studying the hallway rather than me, as though measuring possibilities invisible to everyone else. Outside, thunder rolled once more across Manhattan. Then he looked at me again and spoke with the same calm certainty that had silenced an entire corridor without anyone realizing it. "Miss Bennet," he said, somehow knowing my name before I had offered it, "I do not believe it is safe for you to leave this hotel alone tonight." My first instinct was to laugh because his warning sounded impossible. Safe? I was a florist carrying damp sleeves, sore feet, and a paycheck that barely covered groceries. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody had any reason to care where I went after work. Yet the confidence in his voice made it difficult to dismiss him. "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully, forcing a polite smile. "But I only found something on the floor. I can hand it to hotel security and go home." His eyes never left mine. They were not intimidating in the obvious way. They were simply patient, like someone waiting for me to notice the same danger he had already accepted as fact. "The man who approached us was not hotel security," he replied. "He wanted what you found." A chill settled across my shoulders despite the warmth of the hallway. "How do you know?" I asked. Instead of answering immediately, he glanced toward one of the men standing several feet behind him. The man gave an almost invisible nod before walking away without speaking. It happened so naturally that I realized no orders had needed to be spoken aloud. Everyone already understood their role. The stranger turned back to me. "Because I know everyone responsible for security tonight." His words were calm, almost conversational. There was no arrogance in them. Only certainty. "And he does not work for this hotel." I looked toward the crowded ballroom where laughter had returned, glasses clinked together, and a charity auction was beginning as though the evening had unfolded exactly according to plan. It felt impossible that something serious could exist beneath so much elegance. Then I remembered the whispered conversation behind the private lounge door. The silver flash drive. The man whose smile had seemed just a little too rehearsed. None of it felt accidental anymore. "Who are you?" I asked quietly. For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted into the faintest suggestion of a smile. "My name is Adrian Romano." The name meant nothing to me. I searched my memory for a politician, a businessman, a celebrity, but found nothing. He seemed to notice my confusion and almost looked relieved by it. "That is probably for the best," he said. Before I could ask another question, the event coordinator hurried around the corner. "Claire," she called, sounding both frustrated and exhausted. "There you are. We have been looking everywhere." The storm damaged another arrangement near the grand staircase. She stopped abruptly when she noticed Adrian. Her face changed in an instant. Her shoulders straightened. Her hurried expression disappeared beneath careful professionalism. "Mr. Romano," she said softly. "I hope everything is satisfactory this evening." Adrian acknowledged her with a courteous nod. "Everything has been excellent." The coordinator smiled with visible relief before turning back to me. "Claire, as soon as you finish upstairs, you are free to leave. We finally have enough staff." Leave. The word should have comforted me. Instead, I noticed Adrian watching the entrance to the ballroom rather than listening to our conversation. His attention had shifted completely. Following his gaze, I saw the same smiling man from earlier standing across the room beside a marble column. He appeared to be chatting pleasantly with another guest, but every few seconds his eyes drifted toward me. Adrian spoke so quietly that only I could hear him. "Do not let anyone else know you still have the flash drive." I instinctively touched the pocket of my jacket. He noticed the movement immediately and shook his head ever so slightly. "Do not look at it again," he said. "Just keep walking exactly as you normally would." I swallowed hard. And then what? Thunder rolled outside with enough force to rattle the towering windows. Adrian met my eyes one last time before answering. "Then you leave with me. It is the only way both of us make it through this night without giving anyone a reason to remember your face." I wanted to tell Adrian Romano he had chosen the wrong person. I was not brave. I was not important. I was the woman who remembered to water orchids on schedule and bought generic cereal because the name brand cost $3 more. Whatever world he belonged to had nothing to do with mine. I cannot leave with a stranger, I whispered. People do not do that. His expression remained calm. Normally, they should not. That answer only made me more uneasy. Before I could argue again, the event coordinator handed me a replacement arrangement and thanked me for staying late. Her smile was genuine, completely unaware of the conversation unfolding beneath the polished surface of the evening. I accepted the flowers and forced myself to walk toward the grand staircase exactly as Adrian had suggested. Do not act differently. Do not look back. Those words echoed through my mind with every step. The ballroom had fully recovered from the blackout. The auctioneer stood beneath bright lights describing vacation packages and rare artwork while guests applauded generous donations. Waiters circulated with silver trays carrying miniature desserts. A jazz trio replaced the string quartet, filling the room with music soft enough to hide private conversations. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. I arranged fresh white lilies beside the staircase, straightened 2 candles, and stepped back to inspect the display. My hands looked steady. They did not feel steady. Every reflection in the polished marble made me wonder whether someone was watching me. Every passing smile felt slightly rehearsed. As I reached for my clipboard, my phone vibrated inside my jacket pocket. The screen displayed an unknown number. I almost ignored it until a second message appeared before the call ended. Leave through the north entrance in 5 minutes. Come alone. No signature. No explanation. I stared at the words, wondering whether they came from Adrian or someone pretending to be him. Before I could decide, another message arrived from the same unknown number. They know you have it. Delete this. My heartbeat climbed into my throat. I quickly locked the screen without replying. Only 3 people knew about the flash drive. Adrian. The smiling man. And me. Somehow that realization made the crowded ballroom feel far lonelier than the empty hallway had. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked toward the corridor where Adrian had been standing. He was gone. So were the men who had accompanied him. For one terrifying moment I wondered if he had already left the hotel. Then I noticed a familiar face across the ballroom. One of the men who had been with Adrian stood near a marble column pretending to study a painting. When our eyes met, he did not wave or smile. He simply adjusted the cuff of his jacket and glanced almost imperceptibly toward a side hallway before returning his attention to the artwork. It was not a command. It was a direction. I quietly picked up my empty cart and headed that way. Halfway down the hallway, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. Fast enough to close the distance. Slow enough not to attract attention. I resisted the urge to turn around. A housekeeping employee pushed a cart toward me from the opposite direction, forcing me to slow down. As we passed each other, she frowned politely. "Miss," she said, lowering her voice. "Someone has been asking every staff member if they have seen a florist wearing a black delivery jacket." The words drained every bit of warmth from my body. I thanked her and continued walking without changing my pace, but inside I felt something shift forever. For the first time that night, I stopped wondering whether Adrian had exaggerated the danger. Instead, I found myself hoping with everything I had left that he would find me before whoever else was already searching. I reached the side hallway just as another roll of thunder shook the windows high above the hotel. The music from the ballroom faded behind thick wooden doors until all I could hear was the steady hum of the building and the rain striking the glass outside. The corridor was almost empty except for polished marble, soft wall sconces, and a single elevator at the far end. One of Adrian's men stood beside it, his hands folded calmly in front of him as though he had been waiting there all evening. He looked at me once, then pressed the elevator button without speaking. The doors slid open immediately. "Miss Bennett," he said quietly. "Please." I stopped several feet away. "Where is Adrian?" He studied me for a brief moment before answering. "Waiting downstairs." I looked back toward the ballroom entrance. Part of me wanted to run inside, find the event coordinator, explain everything, and ask someone to call the police. Another part of me already knew how unbelievable the story sounded. I found a flash drive. A stranger warned me. Someone smiled too much. Someone else knew my name. None of it sounded like enough to justify the fear growing heavier inside my chest. I cannot just disappear, I said. My manager expects me to finish work. Your manager has already been informed that another florist completed your remaining assignments. The answer came so quickly that it startled me. How would you know that? Because Mr. Romano arranged it 10 minutes ago. Before I could ask another question, hurried footsteps echoed from the opposite end of the hallway. Two men in dark business suits appeared around the corner, scanning the corridor with practiced casualness. They were not running. They smiled politely at everyone they passed. Yet something about the way their eyes moved from face to face reminded me of people searching for a lost object they intended to recover before anyone else noticed it was missing. Adrian's bodyguard did not look toward them. He simply stepped aside, keeping the elevator doors open. Miss Bennet, he repeated, his voice still calm. Now. My instincts argued with each other. Every lesson I had learned since childhood told me never to enter an elevator with strangers. Every instinct I had developed during the past hour whispered that staying exactly where I stood might be the greater mistake. The two approaching men looked up at the same moment. One of them smiled with immediate recognition. "Excuse me," he called pleasantly. "Miss, could we ask you a quick question?" My heart answered before my mind could. I stepped into the elevator. The doors began closing almost silently. Just before they sealed shut, I caught one final glimpse of the smiling man from earlier entering the corridor behind the two businessmen. His expression never changed, but his pace quickened ever so slightly. Then the doors closed completely, separating me from the gala, the music, and the only ordinary life I had known. The elevator descended without stopping. Nobody spoke during the ride. I became painfully aware of the flash drive resting inside my jacket pocket, feeling much heavier than something so small should ever feel. When the doors opened again, we stepped into a private underground parking garage where polished black vehicles waited beneath bright white lights. Adrian Romano stood beside one of them with his hands in the pockets of his overcoat, watching the rain pour beyond the concrete entrance. He turned as I approached, relief passing briefly across his face before disappearing beneath the same quiet composure I had seen all night. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. I shook my head. "Do not misunderstand. I still do not trust you." To my surprise, he nodded once. "I know," he replied. "But I believe you are about to understand why leaving this hotel was never really your decision to make." The rain was louder underground than it had been inside the ballroom. It echoed through the concrete entrance of the parking garage, bouncing off polished walls until it sounded like distant applause that never ended. Adrian opened the rear passenger door of the black sedan himself instead of allowing one of the men beside him to do it. The gesture caught me off guard. Nothing about him suggested he needed to prove his authority, yet nothing about him felt careless either. "Please," he said. "We should leave before anyone else reaches this level." I looked at the waiting car, then back toward the elevator that had carried me away from the gala. "I still have my own car," I said. "It is parked on the 3rd level." Adrian nodded once. "It will still be there tomorrow." "You cannot know that." "No," he admitted. "But I know you will not be returning for it tonight." I hated how reasonable he sounded. Every instinct told me to refuse. Every memory of the smiling stranger, the anonymous messages, and the housekeeping employee's warning pushed me in the opposite direction. Finally, I slid into the back seat. Adrian entered from the opposite side while two of his men climbed into another vehicle behind us. The doors closed with a soft click that somehow felt louder than thunder. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and cedar instead of expensive cologne. No music played. No one reached for a phone. The driver quietly pulled away as the security gate opened without anyone needing to step outside. We emerged onto rain-soaked streets where Manhattan looked transformed beneath sheets of water. Neon signs blurred into rivers of color across the windshield. Taxi headlights reflected off flooded pavement. The city that had always felt crowded suddenly seemed strangely empty. I folded my hands together, trying to stop myself from checking whether the flash drive was still inside my pocket every few seconds. Adrian noticed anyway. "You are wondering why someone would risk so much over something that fits in the palm of your hand," he said. I looked toward him cautiously. "Yes." He rested one arm along the door without looking away from the passing skyline. "Because information has always been more valuable than money." His answer raised even more questions. "What is on it?" For the first time since we met, he answered with complete honesty. "I do not know." I stared at him. "You do not know?" "If I knew, none of this would have happened." The simplicity of his reply made it impossible to accuse him of lying. He continued watching the rain while the city drifted past outside. "Someone intended to deliver that drive tonight. Someone else intended to intercept it. You interrupted both plans without realizing it." I leaned back against the seat, replaying every decision I had made since arriving at the hotel. One loose floral crate. One flash drive sliding across polished marble. One moment of trying to do the right thing. It felt impossible that something so ordinary had rewritten my entire evening. "Then why are you helping me?" I asked quietly. Adrian remained silent for several long seconds before answering. "Because the people searching for that drive no longer see you as a florist." He turned toward me, his expression steady but unexpectedly gentle. "They see you as the last person who touched something they desperately need." The driver slowed before a pair of iron gates nearly 12 feet tall. Cameras rotated silently above stone pillars while uniformed security personnel acknowledged the approaching vehicle with respectful nods. Beyond the gate stretched a long tree-lined driveway disappearing into the rain. At the end stood an elegant limestone estate glowing warmly against the storm, less like a fortress than a family home preserved from another century. I looked through the rain-covered window, then back at Adrian. "Where are you taking me?" His answer came without hesitation. "Somewhere the people looking for you cannot simply walk through the front door." The estate was quieter than any place I had ever visited. Not silent, because silence belongs to empty buildings. This house breathed. Rain tapped softly against tall windows. Fire crackled somewhere beyond the entrance hall. A grandfather clock marked each passing second with patient certainty. The moment I stepped inside, a woman in her 60s approached carrying neatly folded towels. She smiled with the warmth of someone welcoming family home after a long trip instead of greeting a stranger who had arrived in the middle of the night. "Miss Bennett," she said. "I am Margaret. We have prepared a guest room for you." I looked toward Adrian. "You told them my name?" "Only what they needed to know," he answered. Margaret offered me a dry sweater, comfortable pants, and a pair of warm socks. None of them looked new. They looked carefully chosen, as though someone had simply wanted me to feel comfortable instead of impressed. "There is hot tea whenever you are ready," she added before quietly disappearing down another hallway. I stood there for a moment, confused. This was not what I expected from a man surrounded by security vehicles and whispered conversations. There were no marble statues displayed for attention. No oversized portraits celebrating power. Family photographs rested on bookshelves beside worn novels and fresh flowers arranged with surprising simplicity. Someone had placed white lilies near the staircase. They were not perfect. One stem leaned slightly to the left. Whoever arranged them had cared more about beauty than symmetry. I found myself smiling despite everything. Adrian noticed. "You approve?" he asked. I walked closer to the arrangement. "Whoever designed these understands flowers." "My mother did," he said quietly. "She believed a home should always have something alive inside it." The sentence lingered between us longer than either of us expected. There was no performance in his voice. Just memory. Margaret returned carrying 2 steaming mugs and quietly placed them on a small table before leaving us alone again. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup without taking a sip. "Am I allowed to leave?" I asked. Adrian answered immediately. "Yes." I blinked. That was too fast. He almost smiled. "Because it is the truth." "Then why would I stay?" He looked toward the rain outside the enormous windows. "Because I believe you will decide after hearing everything." I reached into my jacket and slowly removed the silver flash drive. It suddenly seemed even smaller beneath the soft light of the room. "Take it," I said. "This belongs in your world, not mine." Adrian looked at it but made no move to touch it. "Keep holding it." "Why?" "Because everyone already believes you have it. Whether it stays in your pocket or mine changes very little tonight." His honesty was becoming impossible to predict. Most powerful people I had met during flower deliveries wanted immediate control over everything around them. Adrian seemed strangely willing to leave decisions in my hands even when they complicated his own situation. "You really are giving me a choice," I said quietly. "Yes." "Even if I walk out that front door?" He nodded once. "No one here will stop you." I searched his face for signs of manipulation and found only exhaustion carefully hidden beneath discipline. At that exact moment one of the security officers entered the room and respectfully addressed Adrian. "Sir, the vehicle we discussed has reached the outer checkpoint." Adrian's expression remained calm, but something sharpened behind his pale blue eyes. "Thank you," he replied. The officer left without another word. I looked at Adrian. "Who arrived?" He met my gaze for several silent seconds before answering. "Someone who believes you should never have left the hotel tonight." I expected shouting. I expected threats. Instead, Adrian quietly placed his untouched cup of tea on the table and stood with the same measured calm he had carried all evening. Only now did I notice the subtle change in the room around him. The men outside the study did not rush through the hallways. They simply appeared where they needed to be, exchanging brief nods instead of anxious conversations. The entire house seemed to tighten like a sail catching stronger wind. "You should stay here," Adrian said. "No," I answered before thinking. "I am tired of everyone deciding where I belong." For the first time that night, he looked directly into my eyes for several long seconds. Then he nodded. "Fair enough." He walked toward the large window overlooking the front drive and motioned for me to join him. Rain blurred the security lights beyond the iron gates into soft circles of gold. A dark sedan waited outside the checkpoint while 2 security officers spoke with its driver beneath oversized umbrellas. Nobody appeared angry. Nobody raised a voice. Everything looked surprisingly ordinary. "That is the problem," Adrian said quietly. "The dangerous moments almost never look dramatic." I folded my arms tightly. "Who is in the car?" "Someone representing people who believe the flash drive belongs to them." "Do they know I am here?" He answered honestly. "They suspect." Before I could ask another question, Margaret entered carrying a tray with fresh sandwiches as though nothing unusual was happening outside. She smiled kindly when she noticed I had barely touched my tea. "You should eat something, dear. Worry is always louder on an empty stomach." I almost laughed. The simple sentence somehow made everything feel more real than any whispered warning had. Margaret placed the tray on the table, gently squeezed my shoulder, and quietly left the room. Adrian watched the closed door for a moment. "She has worked with my family since before I was born," he said. "She reminds everyone to eat before making important decisions." "Does anyone ever argue with her?" I asked. The faintest smile crossed his face. "No one has been foolish enough to try." For a brief moment, the weight pressing on my chest eased. Then a soft chime echoed through the house. One of the security officers appeared at the doorway. "Sir, the visitor is requesting 5 minutes. He says he only wishes to speak." Adrian nodded once. Tell him I will meet him in the front salon. The officer disappeared. I stared at Adrian in disbelief. You are actually going to meet him? Avoiding conversations usually creates larger problems. And if he asks about me? Adrian turned toward me. He will. I instinctively reached into my pocket, wrapping my fingers around the flash drive. Then give him this, I said. And whatever this is. Adrian slowly shook his head. If this were only about the drive, tonight would have ended at the hotel. My confusion deepened. Then what is it about? He stepped closer to the fireplace, the warm light reflecting across the polished wood shelves lined with books and family photographs. Someone inside that gala wanted two groups to blame each other for something neither one started. The flash drive is evidence. But you. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You were the only unpredictable part of their plan because you were never supposed to touch it. Outside, headlights shifted as another vehicle rolled through the open gates after receiving permission to enter. I looked through the rain-streaked glass and felt my heartbeat quicken. I thought you said only one car arrived. Adrian's eyes followed mine toward the driveway. His calm expression remained unchanged, but his voice grew quieter than I had ever heard it. It was only one car. He watched the second set of headlights approach the house without invitation. Which means someone else now knows exactly where to find you. The second set of headlights stopped several yards behind the first vehicle without anyone directing it where to park. Every security officer near the front entrance noticed the arrival at the exact same moment, yet no one reached for panic. They simply adjusted their positions with quiet precision, creating space where there had been none a heartbeat earlier. I stood beside the window, my fingers tightening around the warm ceramic mug Margaret had insisted I hold. You expected one visitor, I whispered. Not two. Adrian kept his eyes on the rain. The first one requested a conversation. The second one did not request anything. Something about the way he separated those two facts unsettled me even more than the unexpected arrival itself. I looked toward him. Is someone following the first car? Possibly. Or following me? He did not answer immediately. Silence became his answer. My stomach sank. I finally understood what he had been trying to explain since the hotel. I was no longer simply a witness. Without choosing to be, I had become the easiest path towards something other people wanted. A discreet knock sounded at the study door before one of Adrian's senior security advisors entered. He was older than the others, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair and the calm posture of someone who had spent decades solving difficult problems without raising his voice. Mr. Romano, he said respectfully. The first visitor insists he came alone. Our cameras confirm that. The second vehicle entered from the east access road after the gates opened. They used the first arrival as cover. Adrian nodded slowly. Exactly as I expected. I stared at him. You expected this? He finally turned toward me. I hoped I was wrong. The advisor placed a small tablet on the desk. Security camera footage filled the screen. Rain blurred much of the image, but one frame showed the second sedan passing through the gates several seconds behind the authorized vehicle. It had happened so naturally that I would never have noticed if someone had not replayed it. That was not an accident, Adrian said. Someone wanted us focused on one conversation while something else quietly entered the property. My pulse quickened. Then call the police. Neither Adrian nor the advisor dismissed the idea. Instead, Adrian spoke with surprising patience. If someone has gone to this much effort over information they do not yet possess, they have almost certainly prepared for ordinary responses. I hated that his reasoning made sense. My ordinary world solved problems by dialing 3 numbers. His world seemed built around anticipating the move before it happened. Margaret quietly entered again, carrying a folded blanket. She draped it gently across my shoulders without interrupting the conversation. You are still shivering, she said softly. I had not even realized it. She smiled kindly at Adrian before leaving. The simple gesture grounded me in a way I could not explain. Whatever Adrian's world truly was, it still contained people who worried about warm blankets and untouched tea. That mattered more than I expected. Adrian walked toward a bookshelf along the far wall and removed a framed family photograph. It showed a younger version of himself standing beside an elegant woman arranging flowers in a sunlit garden. He looked at the picture only briefly before handing it to me. "My mother taught me something when I was 10, he said quietly. She said flowers reveal character. The impatient force them open. The wise protect them until they bloom on their own." I looked from the photograph back to him. "Is that why you have not taken the flash drive from me?" He nodded once. "If I demanded it, you would spend the rest of your life wondering whether you had been used." His answer caught me completely off guard. "I would rather earn your trust than your obedience." Before I could respond, the advisor touched the earpiece hidden beneath his collar. His composed expression changed for the first time that night. He looked directly at Adrian. "Sir," he said quietly, "the first visitor has withdrawn his request to meet." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" The advisor swallowed once before answering. "Because someone reached him first and told him the flash drive is no longer the real objective. They are asking for Miss Bennet instead." I had spent my entire life believing ordinary people disappeared into crowds. We were the faces nobody remembered after passing on a busy sidewalk. That illusion ended the moment Adrian's advisor quietly announced that strangers were no longer searching for the flash drive. They were searching for me. The words settled over the room heavier than the storm pressing against the windows. I looked down at the tiny silver drive resting in my hand. "Then they can have it," I said, placing it carefully on the table between us. "If this is what they wanted, let them take it." Adrian did not move. Neither did his advisor. Finally Adrian spoke. "Claire, if the drive were enough, they would never have changed their objective." I frowned. "I do not understand." "Someone realized you saw more than you realize." I replayed every moment from the hotel in my mind. The blackout. The private lounge. The whispered conversation. The smiling stranger. The flash drive sliding across the marble. Nothing seemed important enough to place me at the center of someone else's plans. Then a memory surfaced that I had completely ignored. During the second blackout, just before I picked up the drive, one of the silhouettes inside the lounge had adjusted his sleeve beneath the emergency lights. A distinctive signet ring flashed for only a second. I had not thought about it since. "Wait," I whispered. "The man inside the lounge." Adrian looked at me immediately. "What about him?" "He wore a ring. A dark blue stone with a silver crest around it." The room fell completely still. Even the advisor stopped writing notes. Adrian's expression remained controlled, but his eyes sharpened. "Are you certain?" I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember every detail. "Yes." I only noticed because the emergency lights reflected off the stone. Adrian slowly exhaled. "Then everything makes sense." I stared at him. "Tell me." He walked toward the fireplace before answering. "Very few people wear that family crest. Whoever attended the meeting inside the hotel was never supposed to be seen. And I saw him." "You saw enough." Suddenly the flash drive felt almost unimportant. I understood now why Adrian had never rushed to take it from me. Information could be copied. A witness could not. "I cannot identify his face," I admitted. "Only the ring." Adrian nodded. "Sometimes one detail changes everything." Outside, rain continued falling across the estate while security vehicles quietly repositioned along the driveway. Nobody inside the house raised their voice. Nobody surrendered to panic. The calm surrounding Adrian no longer felt unnatural. It felt deliberate, like the center of a storm where every decision mattered because emotions only clouded judgment. I looked toward the front windows where faint headlights still glowed beyond the gates. What happens now? I asked. Adrian answered without hesitation. Now we stop reacting and begin choosing. He picked up the flash drive for the first time that night but did not place it in his own pocket. Instead, he held it out toward me once again. I trusted your instincts when you picked this up. I trust them now. I looked at the drive, then back at him. You still want me to keep it? No. He gave the faintest smile I had seen since we met. I want you to decide where it belongs. I stared at the silver drive resting in his open hand. For the first time since leaving the hotel, fear was no longer the loudest voice inside me. I thought about my mother teaching me to return lost things because doing the right thing was rarely convenient. I thought about Margaret quietly placing a blanket over my shoulders. I thought about Adrian giving me every opportunity to walk away instead of demanding obedience. I reached forward and placed the flash drive into his hand. Then let us end this the right way, I said. Adrian closed his fingers around it and nodded once. Good, he replied softly. Because by sunrise, the truth inside this drive will matter far less than the choice you just made. 1 year later, the same hotel stood beneath a clear autumn sky where the storm had once hidden the city behind sheets of rain. The chandeliers still glowed with quiet elegance. The orchestra still welcomed guests with familiar melodies. Crystal glasses still reflected warm light across polished marble floors. From a distance, nothing had changed. But I had learned that the most important changes are often invisible. I paused outside the ballroom entrance, smoothing the sleeve of my midnight blue evening gown before taking a slow breath. The scent of fresh white orchids drifted through the air. This time they had not arrived on a delivery cart. I had chosen every arrangement myself weeks earlier, insisting that beauty should remind people of hope instead of perfection. Margaret stood beside the entrance with the same gentle smile I remembered from that unforgettable night. She adjusted one small flower that had shifted in a centerpiece and looked at me with quiet pride. Your mother would be proud of these, she said softly. I smiled. I learned from the best people. She reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze before stepping aside. Beyond the doors, hundreds of guests gathered beneath golden light, laughing, greeting old friends, and celebrating another year of generosity. Very few of them knew how close that same ballroom had once come to becoming the beginning of a much darker story. Fewer still knew that the truth hidden inside one small silver flash drive had quietly prevented years of misunderstanding between families who had almost become enemies because someone believed lies would travel farther than honesty. The truth eventually found its way into the right hands. It always takes longer than fear, but it lasts much longer too. You are thinking too much again. I turned and found Adrian standing beside me. He wore another perfectly tailored black tuxedo, but somehow he looked different from the man I had first met beneath flickering lights. Not less powerful. Just lighter. The guarded distance in his eyes had been replaced by something steadier, something earned instead of inherited. He offered his arm without saying another word. A year earlier I would have hesitated. Tonight I accepted it naturally. Together we walked into the ballroom. Conversations paused for only a moment before continuing, not because people feared him, but because they respected him. I noticed hotel employees smiling instead of lowering their eyes. I noticed waiters greeting him by name. I noticed Adrian stopping to thank each of them before moving on. Power had not disappeared from his life. It had simply learned better manners. As we reached the grand staircase, my eyes found the exact place where a single silver flash drive had once slid across polished marble and changed everything. It seemed impossible that such an ordinary moment had redirected 2 lives. Adrian followed my gaze and quietly asked, "Do you ever wish you had left it on the floor?" I looked around the ballroom filled with flowers, laughter, music, and people who would never know how much had been protected without ever realizing it. Then I looked back at him. Sometimes I wish that night had never frightened me, I admitted. But I have never wished it had never happened. He smiled, not because my answer surprised him, but because he already understood it. The orchestra began another piece as couples stepped onto the dance floor. Outside, gentle rain started falling again, soft enough to sound almost comforting against the windows. I realized then that storms are never remembered only for the damage they threaten to bring. Sometimes they are remembered because they reveal which people choose to stand beside you after the clouds finally pass. Adrian gently squeezed my hand, and for the first time since that extraordinary night, I understood that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the quiet decision to remain kind after fear has every reason to change who you are.